John is 82 years old and is standing at the top of a staircase. He is looking down carefully at the first step. He lifts his right leg slightly into the air. For a moment, it stays there and then he withdraws it. He tries again. This time, the foot goes a little lower, closer to the step, but again, he pulls it back. What is John actually doing? He has been climbing stairs his entire life for 80 years. And not just once, but more than 1,000 times. And that's too without much thinking. So what has changed now that he needs to double check a single step? Hello, I'm Maneesha Rajpal and you are listening to Inner Architecture. This is the third episode of our Neuro-Rehabilitation Series and we are going to talk about the brain-body loop. Today, we are exploring how movement actually recovers after injury. In the previous episode, we spoke about the brain as headquarters and the muscles as the police carrying out the commands. And in this episode, we are going one layer deeper because movement is not linear. It is not just command and action. Rather, it is a loop. And when that loop is disrupted, recovery gets confusing. But if you understand this loop, recovery is seen like never before. Let's go back to the staircase where John is still standing. And you could easily walk down the same staircase while you were on a phone call. So let us slow down and understand what happens in a normal scenario. Before you took that first step on a staircase, your brain had already planned it. It had already predicted the height of a step, the balance it will need to create, and the effort that this step is going to require. And once the stage of prediction is successfully achieved, only then your leg will move and your foot will land on the first step. Now, what next? Once you have landed on the first step of the staircase, the signals will travel back to the brain and assess, was that landing stable? Is it what the brain expected? And based on that feedback, the next step gets adjusted. So movement follows a sequence: planning, movement, feedback, adjustment. And if you want to remember it simply, remember this: plan, act, check, adjust. Plan means the brain prepares. Act means the body moves. Check means the feedback is taken. Adjust means the next moment improves. And this is done at every single step. That is why it is a loop and not just a linear command and action. Let me help you with a simple acronym on holding to. PACA. P-A-C-A. P stands for plan, A stands for act, C stands for check, A stands for adjust. And do you know, there is actually a name for this. In neuroscience, this repeating cycle of plan, act, check, adjust is called sensory motor loop. If something just shifted in the way you became present to the dynamics of movement, you may want to save this episode because what comes next goes even deeper. Before we move ahead, instead of repeatedly calling sensory motor loop, I will call it PACA to bring ease to listening and absorbing the PACA, that is plan, act, check, adjust. Now, when this loop flows smoothly, what do you think movement feels like? Natural? Effortless? You don't think about a step, you just take it. Like you walked naturally on a staircase even while talking on the phone. But now imagine what happens after a stroke with respect to Paka. Planning becomes cautious and doubtful, action becomes slower and effortful, checking becomes uncertain and unreliable, adjustment becomes hesitant and delayed. The Paka loop loses its effectiveness. Now, I want you to notice when the loop loses rhythm, it is not just movement that suffers. And here I would like to mention what Selzer's textbook of neural repair and rehabilitation has already established, that after a stroke, it is not only muscle strength that needs rebuilding, it is this feedback loop as well that needs to be retrained. I repeat, it is not only muscle strength that needs rebuilding. It is this feedback loop as well that needs to be retrained. Think of it like this. The brain builds and maintains a map of the body, and that map begins to blur after a stroke. So the question is, how can a confident step be planned on a blurred map? As a result, the confidence begins to drop. That is why someone may say, I don't trust my step. Not because the muscle disappeared, it is because the loop became unstable. Now, let me tell you something that neuroscience says about the brain, and I think this will shift the way you see movement. Neuroscience describes the brain as a prediction system. Now, what does that mean? It means the brain does not wait for movement to happen and then react. Rather, it prepares before acting. Therefore, it generates a prediction. For instance, what will this moment feel like? Or what will be the outcome of this moment? And then after the moment, the brain checks. Did my foot land the way the brain had planned? Did the muscle send back the feedback the brain was expecting? Imagine the staircase suddenly has an unequal step. Your leg dives slightly more. And from this feedback, your leg muscles, the next step is planned accordingly. This is called predictive processing. And this prediction system is exactly what is running inside every single step of Paka. Now think about rehabilitation. When someone is recovering from a stroke, a great deal of attention goes towards muscle strengthening. A physiotherapist works on building strength back into the muscle, leg. This is foundational work. One of the goals is to make those muscles capable of supporting the body of its weight. But can I ask you to pause here for just a moment? Think about a computer. When a computer stops working, what do? You check a keyboard, you check the mouse, you check whether the screen is responding. But what if the problem is not in any of those? And what if the processing unit itself, the part that receives information, makes sense of it and decides what to do next? What if that is the part that has been disrupted? You could have a perfectly functioning keyboard, a perfectly functioning screen, and a computer would still not work the way it should. Now bring that back to the body after a stroke. The muscles, think of them as a keyboard and the screen. The output, that can be strengthened, that can be trained, and the keyboard can be perfectly fine. The screen can be perfectly fine, and yet the computer still does not work the way it should. Because the keyboard was never a problem. The problem was the central processing unit, the CPU. For us, it is this sensory motor loop that can be equated with the CPU. The part that takes in information, makes sense out of it, and decides what happens next. And when the CPU loses its coherence, the output feels uncertain, no matter how strong the muscles are. This is actually where recovery gets misunderstood. Recovery is not only about stronger muscles, it's about restoring the loop, because after brain injury, it is this sensory motor loop that becomes fragile. And neuro-rehabilitation, at its deepest level, aims to restore the integrity of this loop. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, and I want you to stay with me here. For the loop to be restored, it needs to be practiced. But a staircase is not the place to begin. Think about it, the cost of getting it wrong. There is a fall, and the brain cannot learn well under threat. Rather, it needs a space where it can plan, act, check, adjust, but safely. We need to give space where the brain feels safe to practice this PACA, that is plan, act, check, adjust. So let me ask you, is there a movement that runs the exact same loop but safely without any risk at all? And the answer is yes. And it may surprise you how simple it is. Imagine you're sitting at a table, a sheet of paper in front of you, a pen in your hand, you decide to write. Before each stroke, the brain plans, the hand acts, the eyes check, the next stroke gets adjusted. Plan, act, check, adjust, running in a simple activity of handwriting. Yes, handwriting is a simple activity where a brain can practice the same PACA loop, that is plan, act, check, adjust. Isn't it simple yet profound? And you know how it takes just a fraction of a second to switch on a light and suddenly everything is visible? If this episode has brought some of that light to the dark room of recovery, save this episode to your playlist because you will want to come back to this one. Now, here is what the research says, and this genuinely fascinated me when I had read it for the first time. The research has established that each stroke in handwriting involves a full process of sensory motor transformation. That means planning a stroke to write, action by muscles of hand, checking as feedback from eyes, and adjusting the next stroke. And let me tell you that in today's world, more number of researchers are getting drawn to the mechanics of handwriting. And here is something that got published recently in 2026. I am talking about a study published in the Journal of Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience that confirms what we have just got present to. This study clearly mentions that handwriting engages a distributed brain networks, cortical, subcortical, cerebellar regions, all working together in motor planning, execution, and sensory motor integration. So when you pick up a pen and write slowly, deliberately, you are not doing a simple task. You are running the full sensory motor loop, the very same loop that John needs to navigate that staircase. And when that loop becomes steadier in a small task like handwriting, it begins to stabilize in the activities requiring larger muscles. Allow me to mention that this does not replace physiotherapy. Rather, it complements it. Because yes, muscles need strengthening and the loop needs stability. And when that brain-body loop regains its coherence and integrity, movement begins to feel natural again. So now the real question becomes this. If recovery depends on restoring, plan, act, check, adjust, how do we deliberately strengthen each part of that cycle? Of course, as simple as writing runs the same loop. But have you ever stopped to notice what is actually happening inside the brain the moment you pick up a pen? Is it just a finger movement or is it the entire brain that gets involved? In the next episode, we break that down. We look at writing not as a habit, but as a cognitive motor event. Because when you understand what the brain is doing while you write, you begin to see why small moments can influence larger recovery. And that changes how you look at a pen forever. If you know someone, a caregiver, a family member, or someone walking alongside a person in recovery, consider sharing this series with them. Because sometimes one shift in perspective is all it brings, the turning point in recovery. This is Maneesha Rajpal, and you have been listening to Inner Architecture.